Hello, welcome to Go Library. This is Dr. Ning. Today, our guest is Michael Young, an American war correspondent who used to work in the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. Michael had been reporting on the ground for the Hong Kong protests since June 2019 for about 6 months. His entry into the Hong Kong was denied in February 2020. Hello, Michael. Welcome to join us.
Hello from Chiang Mai, Thailand. Ni hao.
Ni hao. My question is, Beijing is to pass a national security legislation for Hong Kong. What does this new move imply to you?
It's very bad. I mean, they're strangling down on Hong Kong as they have been for so many years now. But especially, starting last year, it became more and more intense as the months passed by, and now they're going for it. I think with the outbreak of the virus and however that got out here, and now they're opportunistically going for Hong Kong while the United States and others are distracted. The Hong Kongers obviously are extremely angry. What time is it now? It's about midnight here, so I would say in about less than maybe 10 more hours, the Hong Kongers are going to start with another major protest. They're very angry. The Hong Kongers are very, very angry. They're very afraid, of course, because they know what CCP has done to Tibetans. They know what they've done to Uyghurs. They know what they've done to so many other people, including Falun Gong and their own Chinese people that are just dissenters. And so it's a very big deal for Hong Kong, and the United States must stand beside Hong Kong and Taiwan.
So we all know that the Hong Kong people are planning a protest on Sunday, yeah? So what would be the difference from the protests last year?
Well, the threats are more serious now from China. The threats have always been serious. It's not like they haven't been serious. But now, they're being more overt in their aggressions. There's nothing standing in between somebody being arrested off the street and driven or taken by train immediately to China. I mean, you know how close it is. It's just a very quick train or van trip over to mainland and never being seen again. And the Hong Kongers completely realize this. They know, of course, that there's facial recognition cameras all over the place. I saw them destroy many of those cameras last year. Of course, the government's been busy putting the cameras back up, and so and the police have become better and better at their tactics on how to round up and arrest hundreds of people at once. It's very serious. I mean, everything goes. Everything's on the table. We've seen what CCP has done with, again, what they've done with the Uyghurs, what they've done with Tibetans, what they've done with others. This is war.
You were in Hong Kong last year. Why were you there in the first place?
War. I'm a war correspondent, and I've been watching China for years. At that point, I had 2 books out in Japan. The third one came out recently. They're in Japanese language. I wrote them in English. They were translated, but they're about Chinese information war from CCP. And so when the big protest started on June 9th in Hong Kong, I paid very close attention. And then there was another big protest on, I believe, June 12th. So then I started preparing to possibly pack to head to Hong Kong. There was another couple of protests. I jumped on an airplane. So sometime there about June, 23rd, 25th, something like that, I was in Hong Kong already. So when they broke into the LegCo on July 1st, I was inside of LegCo. When the Patriots broke into LegCo and stormed the building, I was there with them inside of LegCo. So throughout, July, I was out there night after night, long nights and days out with the Patriots. Others would call them protesters out in the streets. And I realized it's actually an insurgency, that they aren't protests. I mean, protests are a part of insurgencies, but this is actually, there's a big difference between just protest and civil unrest and actually insurgencies. There's very serious differences. And as someone who studied insurgencies for years and spent years in various insurgencies, whether that's Iraq, Afghanistan, Nepal, Philippines, other places, I knew what I was looking for. And I knew that this was not going to go away quickly in Hong Kong. The Hong Kongers are quite serious. And it's also quite serious that some are ready to fight to the death. And I think they're, we're getting closer and closer to a time when that might become a reality.
How different was Hong Kong then from a war zone?
Well, it is a war zone. It's just a very low-level war. There's high-intensity insurgencies like we had in Iraq and Afghanistan, Nepal, other places. Philippines is kind of a medium-level insurgency down there on Mindanao. But, a high-level insurgency is one where, it's, government buildings are being overrun and that sort of thing. I mean, it's totally kinetic, assassinations all the time, huge attacks. And then the lower-level insurgencies like we've got in Hong Kong, or when you see actions all the time, but they can be, there's a lot of violence, but not a lot of fatalities. And so that's kind of I call it a category 1 insurgency in Hong Kong. Whereas Iraq and Afghanistan were like Cat 5, top level, total kinetic, car bombs all the time, suicide bombers all the time, that sort of thing. Now we're getting into a situation where Hong Kong could become more like a category 2, with actual fatalities. Well, there's been some fatalities, but it could increase. It depends. It depends largely on the Hong Kongers and what also the CCP will do, because as we know, the Hong Kong police are just puppets for the CCP. I mean, the Hong Kong police are not an independent police force. Their strings go straight to Beijing.
What impressed you the most and what concerned you the most?
What concerns me the most? Well, these are big questions. I mean, will the CCP start loading up trains full of Hong Kongers and disappearing them off into China? I mean, they could do that. There's nothing we can physically do to stop that short of military conflict. Because it's just a quick train ride. It's, how quick it is. It's very fast. So they could literally, the PLA, well, they have troops, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army. There are troops already stationed all over Hong Kong and have been for years, right? But the trains and the airplanes and the boat trip, you could have 100,000 troops there in Hong Kong in 12 hours. It's very simple. Just get them on the trains, get them on the airplanes, get them on the boats, drive across the border, and suddenly you've got 100,000, troops in Hong Kong, and they could be loading people off on trains off the concentration camps. So that's a worst case scenario right there. And it's a very real possibility. I don't see a best case scenario where China just leaves them alone. I don't see that happening. That's clearly not happening, and it's not going to happen in my view.
So, please choose 3 photos that best portray Hong Kong across 6 months of protests.
Please choose 3 photos.
Yeah, I suppose you have taken lots of photos.
Actually, some of the most important things that I shot were video. And for instance, if you remember the video that went viral of the police vans almost running people down, I made that video. That was a police attack that night. That was the night of the stampede, which was caused by police, rushing with their vehicles and throwing flashbangs, and many people were wounded. Many dozens of Hong Kongers were wounded. I and others, including Tommy Walker, he's a British journalist, or was Tommy there that night? There was quite a few. Yeah, Tommy was there. And there was quite a few of us there that saw the police withholding medical care for hours for critically wounded people. Like one young lady had a compound fracture of her forearm. The police kept her on the street for what must have been 4 hours, about 4 hours with a compound fracture. And there was plenty of ambulances. There was ambulances parked everywhere. They were just keeping them there on the ground. You know, hospitals were close by. It was unbelievable. So, I mean, we saw things like that on a constant basis. Many of the journalists were as well were getting hit with, I got hit with rubber bullets. We got hit with tear gas hundreds of times. I was in approximately 100 major protests. And I got tear gassed hundreds of times, because sometimes you might get not tear gassed at all that night, and sometimes you might get tear gassed 20 times, right? And so they were just flooding the neighborhoods with tear gas. It were fumigators. We called them fumigators. They were hitting so much tear gas, it was hitting the children in the buildings, elderly people, people with, ill, respiratory illness. They didn't care. The police were just fumigating neighborhoods constantly, night after night. It was unbelievable. HongKongers fumigating HongKongers, and they were doing it on a regular basis. Hong Kong police, specifically, not HongKongers, but Hong Kong police doing the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party, put what must have been literally tons of tear gas onto the Hong Kong streets.
Are you sure they are true Hong Kong police, or they are PLA in disguise?
Well, some of them were quite large. As you know, Hong Kongers tend to be a little smaller than the mainlanders. But I never caught them speaking Mandarin, and I would get up there all the time with my microphones, and I would ask people who were watching my live streams, listen closely for Mandarin, because as you know, the Hong Kong police are speaking Cantonese. But sometimes Hong Kongers would say they heard police speaking Mandarin. I don't know whether there were PLA officers there who were acting as quote unquote observers or advisors. A lot of us theorize that they probably were. They were not doing it overtly, to my knowledge. It's hard to imagine that they're not, though.
So you made lots of live stream last year. What do you expect from people who have watched your live stream?
Well, you can see the level of violence that the police were doing when it was unnecessary. I mean, often the patriots, the quote unquote protesters, were not doing anything, and suddenly tear gas would rain in, or police would come down and start beating people with nightsticks, putting their knees on the back of people's necks, which can paralyze and kill people, and actually many times has. And for instance, in the United States, that's why police can get sued for doing that. But the police in Hong Kong were doing it on a regular basis. Journalists were constantly getting shot with rubber bullets. I got hit. They sting, but they're not real bullets, thankfully. It was just super violence from the police. Of course, the police did not want to go with ball ammunition, with live ammunition, because it would very occasionally they did, but they realized that killing protesters in front of our cameras could obviously cause an international backlash that could cause huge repercussions. So they were trying to cause as much pain as possible without actually killing people. But there's clearly some deaths that were very questionable. People showing up, in the water, drowned, falling out of buildings, and just so many mysteries that were very, very strange. So what's going on there? Nobody quite knows, but it's clear that there's a lot of deaths there that are unexplained in Hong Kong.
Why is Hong Kong so important to the international community?
Many reasons. One is it's the third largest financial hub in the world, or it was. It probably won't be much longer at this rate, behind London and New York. So, I mean, it's quite, a very serious financial hub. And it's the ATM for China. And not only that, but it's a place where many people, like myself, I mean, we've been there and spent much time in Hong Kong, and we have a lot of affection for Hong Konger people. And so the Hong Kongers have friends all over the world. They're very likable people. And so a lot of us see that our friends are getting hurt. So it's not just some, group of people out somewhere in some country we've never heard of and we don't know anything about them. A lot of us have Hong Konger friends, a huge number of us. And so that hits home in our hearts. So that you can't discount that. It's not all about money. It's not all about this, that, and the other. Like, I think specifically about my Hong Konger friends that I actually know and know quite well. So so there's a big emotional aspect as well. We don't want to see our friends get hurt. We don't want to see such highly educated people who are very peaceful, very law-abiding people suddenly get roped in by the Chinese Communist Party, who literally are worse than Nazis. Most people who compare others to Nazis don't know anything about Nazis or what they're comparing to. But when you make the comparison of Chinese Communist Party to Nazis, it's actually an understatement. It's one of those rare cases where actually a comparison to Nazis is not only accurate, but understated.
In the past 48 hours, the US government has responded strongly to Beijing's new move. How helpful would that be?
Unless Beijing senses that our response and that we're willing to do very severe things to China, which I'm willing to do. But unless they sense that the U.S. government is willing to do very serious things, even go to guns, guns up naval war, which could lead to everything in the world, as you can imagine. Unless China senses that we're very serious and to cause as much pain as possible to not the Chinese people. Most of us know that Americans don't have any animosity towards Chinese. Actually, we tend to like Chinese, but we don't like Chinese Communist Party. And if China senses that we're deadly serious, I think that they'll walk cautiously. If they sense any weakness whatsoever, they're going to fill the vacuum. And they want to they want to kill the chicken to scare the monkey. You've heard that before, I'm sure. Taiwan is next on the menu. And after that will be Japan. For those of us who've studied and watched the playing field and have watched it for years, we can see this progression: Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, right? And from there, the world, right? And so China needs to realize that we're ready to go to the mat for this. If they start murdering Hong Kongers, they need to realize that we're going to cause them as much pain as we can bring to them.
Do you think Hong Kong people can win against the CCP?
Not in a kinetic fight. The terrain does not favor the Hong Kong insurgents, partisans, the fighters, the patriots. It does not favor them. They don't have room to maneuver. They've got the sea all around them to their back. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army is huge. The Hong Kongers are unarmed. This is a similar situation that Poland was in. Poland is a conflict that I studied in great detail. I also lived in Poland for 2 years for various reasons. But Poland also was in a similar situation with the Soviet Union. They were outnumbered, outgunned, out-terrained, out everything, except they had one great friend, the United States, and they had some other serious support, for instance, from the Catholic Church. And there was many things going on at the time, but they fought a political and information war. And so the Polish were very good at, first of all, they're very stubborn. They don't quit easily, right? And so they waged we helped them wage an information and political and economic war. Of course, this was a global fight. Actually, Poland was not the only battlefield. There was Afghanistan. There were the Saudis helped us by manipulating oil prices to affect the Soviet economy. There was many moving parts to this fight, just as there are with China. So no, can can Hong Kong patriots actually win in a kinetic fight? That would be the wrong way to fight. That'd be a very big disadvantage. But Hong Kongers are incredibly good at fighting the information war. They're very good at messaging. They're very good at fighting a political war. They're very good at getting attention. And they have a lot of serious friends around the world. So they should not fight kinetically. They will not do well in that fight. That is my professional view. They should continue to fight with information and politically and economically.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, the Hong Kongers must stay strong. There were times even when the Polish, one of the things that I love about the Polish people is that they're very stubborn. They fight. They're very persistent. There were times when it looked like the Polish, solidarity, which was their insurgency. There was times when it looked like it might fall apart, but it wasn't. It was just like a volcano going quiet for a while. And sometimes even the solidarity members thought, oh, the thing's falling apart, but it wasn't falling apart. These things just ebb and flow. So the Hong Kongers need to stay strong and continue to organize as much as possible and realize that we can and will defeat the CCP. It will take a lot of work. It'll take a lot of effort. When it finally happens, it can happen suddenly. Like with the Soviet Union, it happened like an avalanche, right? So it can look like nothing's happening and all of a sudden, boom, big changes. And it can happen quite suddenly. We see the economy in China is devastated from many, well, you can see what's happening with the virus. First of all, their economy has clearly been smoke and mirrors for years anyway. And now it's going to be laid bare. I mean, the man behind the curtain is being exposed right now. And the markets for the junk that is made in China are now drying up because the United States economy is also devastated. The Europeans are devastated. So, I mean, where's China going to sell its stuff to? There's nobody that's, first of all, China suddenly made probably billions of enemies that, and a lot of us don't want to buy any more products from China, even if we could. And then a lot of people are just out of work. They're not going to buy because they don't have the money. So this is very serious for China. China does not have food security. They could have water issues at any moment. There's all bad days ahead for CCP. Hong Kong needs to stay tough, continue to organize, gather as much intelligence as you can about those police and government sellout members. Anybody who is sold out to the Chinese Communist Party, their day will come, and do not forgive and forget. When this is over, we need to remember that there's going to be trials, and people will be held responsible for selling out to the Chinese Communist Party, and that includes police, and that includes government members who've sold out to China, Chinese Communist Party specifically.
Mm-hmm. So let us wish the protesters safe tomorrow. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully I will see you soon. Yeah. Okay.
Anytime.
Thank you.